So here's the thing about the Galactic Military Academy. When they say elite, what they really mean is congratulations. You're the 0.01% of the galaxy that might survive first contact with something that wants to eat your face. It's not exactly the kind of distinction you put on a resume, unless your career goals include not dying immediately. The Academy sits on an asteroid station somewhere between the Andromeda Gateway and a cluster of stars nobody bothered naming because, frankly, who has the time? It's all gunmetal gray corridors, fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look vaguely deceased, and the faint smell of recycled air that's been through one too many filtration cycles. Motivational posters line the walls. Survive today, fight tomorrow. Real inspirational stuff. Class 7 Niner Delta was what the administration called a diverse cohort, which is corporate speak for, we threw every species we could find into a room and hoped they wouldn't kill each other before graduation. There was Krill, an insectoid from the mandible clusters who had way too much confidence for someone whose exoskeleton made clicking noises every time he moved. Bornu, a silicon-based life form who looked like someone had glued rocks together into a vaguely humanoid shape and given it anxiety. And Liss, an energy being who didn't technically have a body but maintained a glowing form just to make everyone else feel inferior. And then there was me, Jake Morrison, human, the only one in a class of 47 apex predators, natural-born killers, and things that could theoretically exist in hard vacuum without a suit. Commander Thrax stood at the front of the briefing room, all 7 feet of scaled reptilian authority. He had the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled, and considered the concept of joy a tactical weakness. His species, the Ceridians, had been conquering planets while humans were still figuring out fire. And he wanted everyone to know it. The improvisation trial, Thrax announced, his voice like gravel in a blender, has a 40% pass rate. The other 60% are escorted off station and encouraged to find alternative career paths, like retail or death. Krill's mandibles clicked excitedly. Bornu's rocky exterior somehow managed to look more nervous. Liss just pulsed brighter, because of course she did. You will face an arena, Thrax continued. You will have nothing but your wits and your natural abilities. You will improvise a weapon. You will demonstrate its effectiveness. You will pass, or you will leave. Are there questions? I raised my hand. Thrax's eyes, cold and yellow, fixed on me like a targeting computer. Morrison, just to clarify, we can't bring anything into the arena? Nothing. The arena provides everything you need if you're intelligent enough to recognize it. Cool, cool. And by natural abilities, you mean like claws, acid spit, psychic powers, that kind of thing? Thrax's expression didn't change, but I swear I saw something like pity flicker across his face. Correct. I looked down at my very human hands. No claws, no acid glands, no telekinetic abilities. Just 10 fingers, opposable thumbs, and the sinking feeling that my species' main evolutionary advantage was being really, really good at making other things do the killing for us. Fantastic, I muttered. Krill leaned over, his compound eyes glittering with amusement. Perhaps you should request a participation trophy, human. I hear your species enjoys those. And I hear your species has 13 different words for eaten by a larger bug. So maybe we both have our challenges. Thrax slammed a appendage on the splated podium. Silence. You tested 0600 tomorrow. Dismissed. As the class filed out, I caught fragments of conversation. Bornu worrying about whether his mineral density was sufficient. Liss bragging about how she could superheat air molecules into plasma. Krill making elaborate plans involving his acid spit and what sounded like deeply unpleasant biology. And me? I was thinking about what Commander Thrax said. The arena provides everything you need. Everything. 600 came way too early, which is something I'm pretty sure is universal across every species in the galaxy. Nobody likes waking up at dawn to potentially fail out of military school, regardless of how many limbs you have. The observation deck was packed. Apparently, watching candidates either succeed brilliantly or fail spectacularly was considered prime entertainment at the academy. I spotted instructors, upper-level students, and what looked like a few civilians who'd paid for the privilege of watching someone's dreams die in real time. The arena itself was visible through reinforced transparent aluminum, which is neither aluminum nor particularly transparent, but that's military procurement for you. It was a circular space, maybe 30 meters across. White walls, white floor, white ceiling. The kind of sterile, empty environment that screamed, We removed everything on purpose to make this harder. Commander Thrak stood at the control panel, looking like he was about to announce gladiatorial games, which, to be fair, wasn't far off. Candidate Krill, Thrak's voice boomed through the speaker system. You will enter first. Krill clicked his way to the entry port, mandibles working in what I assumed was his species' version of a confident grin. The entire class watched as he stepped into the arena. Thrak activated his datapad. The rules are simple. You have 10 minutes to improvise a weapon using only what you find in the arena. You will then demonstrate its effectiveness on the test dummies we provide. Lethality, durability, and creativity factor into your score. Your time begins now. I pressed closer to the observation window, watching Krill scuttle around the arena. He checked the walls, ran his appendages along the floor seams, looked up at the pater, ceiling. The arena was exactly what it appeared to be, completely empty. Except it wasn't, was it? Krill stopped in the center, tilted his head in that unsettling insect way, and then did something I wasn't expecting. He leaned down and started drooling on the floor. "Oh, that's disgusting," muttered someone behind me. The acidic saliva, which apparently could melt through most standard metals, started eating into the floor panels. Krill carefully worked the dissolving material, shaping it into something resembling a jagged blade. It looked crude, improvised, and probably tetanus-inducing. But when he slashed through the test dummy that dropped from the ceiling, it cut. Not elegantly, not efficiently, but it cut. "Marginal pass," Thrak announced. "Creativity score, adequate. Next candidate." Bornu went next, and I actually felt bad for the guy. He stood in the arena for a solid 3 minutes, his rocky body motionless, probably running through every scenario in his silicon-based brain. Then with a sound like a small earthquake, he snapped off one of his own fingers. The observation deck went silent. He held up the stone digit, tested its weight, and swung it like a club. When the test dummy appeared, he smashed it with enough force to send fragments across the arena. "Pass," Thrak said, making a note, though medically inadvisable. Next candidate. Liz was next, and of course she had to show off. She didn't even pretend to look around the arena, just floated to the center, concentrated her energy form into a tight beam, and superheated the air molecules around her into a crackling plasma whip that looked like something out of a special effects budget. The test dummy didn't stand a chance. She bisected it cleanly, then added a little flourish for the audience. "Pass. Excellent application of innate abilities," Thrak said, and I swear Liz's glow intensified with smugness. 3 down, 44 to go before my turn. I watched every single attempt. Aliens, using retractable claws. Telekinetics ripping panels from the walls using nothing but thought. One candidate from a water world somehow condensed atmospheric moisture into ice shards. Another used electromagnetic manipulation to turn floor bolts into projectiles. Every single one of them used something they were born with, something humans definitively did not have. "Candidate Morrison," Thrak finally called. "You're up." The observation deck got noticeably quieter. I felt eyes on me, multiple sets of eyes, and eye stalks, and whatever sensory organs Liz used. "Here we go." Krill clicked to someone nearby. "Watch the human fail. Their species has no natural weapons, no adaptations. They're basically ambulatory meat." I stepped into the arena. The door sealed behind me with a hiss that sounded way too final. Commander Thrak's voice came through the speakers. "Morrison, you have 10 minutes. Your time begins now." I stood there, in the center of the empty white arena, and smiled. Because I'd noticed something everyone else had missed. Something so obvious that 46 other candidates had literally held it in their hands and never thought twice about it. The test instructions. Printed on standard issue Academy paper. Physical, tangible paper that every candidate had been handed when they entered the arena. I looked down at the paper in my hand. The paper everyone else had dropped or tossed aside because why would you need instructions once you were inside? "Oh," I said to no one in particular. "This is going to be fun. Let me back up for a second, because you need to understand just how confident these aliens were in their natural advantages. We're talking about species that evolved on death worlds, had survived extinction events, and considered fight or flight to be exclusively a fighting question. Krill, for instance, had spent the entire week before the test explaining in excruciating detail how his species' acidic saliva could dissolve most known materials. "It's a natural defense mechanism," he'd said, clicking proudly. "We evolved it to pre-digest our prey while it was still alive." "Cool," I'd replied. "We invented hot sauce." He hadn't gotten the joke. The thing about Krill's acid blade was that it worked. technically speaking. When Thrak had released the test dummy, a articulated mannequin made of standard combat-grade polymers, Krill had slashed at it with his makeshift weapon. The blade cut through, leaving a melted, hissing wound in the dummy's torso. Functionality adequate, Thrak had announced, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone reading a tax code. Structural integrity poor. Estimated weapon lifespan 7 minutes before complete dissolution. Creativity score below average. You passed by exactly 0.3%. Candidate Krill. Krill had still preened like he'd conquered a planet single-handedly. Bornu's attempt had been more desperate than creative, if we're being honest. The guy had literally broken off part of his own body because he couldn't figure out any other option. When he'd swung that stone finger at the test dummy, the impact had been impressive. Sure, the dummy's head had practically exploded into polymer fragments, but Bornu had limped out of the arena, cradling his hand, looking like he regretted every life choice that had led to voluntary self-amputation. Effective, but unsustainable, Thrak had noted. Pass. See medical immediately. The observation deck had erupted in a mix of impressed murmurs and sympathetic winces. Even other rock-based species seemed to think that was a bit extreme. Then Liss had entered, and suddenly, everyone else's attempts looked like amateur hour at the improvisation club. She'd floated into the arena with the kind of confidence that comes from being pure energy, and therefore inherently superior to matter-based life forms. At least, that was the vibe she projected. Her glow had pulsed in rhythmic patterns that I'm pretty sure translated to watch and learn primitives. Liss hadn't wasted time examining the arena. She'd gone straight to the center, condensed her form into a tighter configuration, and then extended a tendril of superheated plasma that crackled and hissed like an angry electrical fire. The air around it shimmered with heat distortion. When the test dummy dropped, she'd carved through it like a laser through butter. Clean cuts, precise angles. The dummy fell into 4 perfectly separated pieces. Then, because Liss couldn't help herself, she'd formed the plasma into different shapes. A spear, a whip, a spinning disc. She'd put on a whole demonstration, turning her weapon improvisation into a performance art piece. Exceptional marks, Thrak had said, and I'd swear I detected the faintest hint of approval in his gravelly voice. Creativity, lethality, and versatility. Candidate Liss sets the current high score. Liss had floated out of the arena, literally glowing brighter, basking in the stir, admiration of her classmates. Several candidates had offered her the equivalent of high fives in their respective species customs. I'd watched 20 more attempts after that, each one showcasing some incredible natural ability that humans just didn't have. Candidate Vrax had retractable diamond-hard claws that extended from his knuckles. He'd used them to score the floor panels into strips, then woven them into a whip-blade hybrid that had shredded the test dummy. Candidate Pool, whose name was actually unpronounceable, but everyone called her Pool because she could liquefy parts of her body, had turned her own hand into a pressurized water jet that cut like an industrial saw. Candidate Thex had 4 arms and apparently hollow bones filled with a combustible gas. He'd broken off a bone shard, ignited the gas, and created a flaming projectile weapon. Every single attempt reinforced the same message. Natural evolution gave you tools. Natural selection made you dangerous. And humans, we, were born naked, defenseless, and unable to synthesize our own vitamin C. We were the galaxy's participation trophy in the evolutionary arms race. At least, that's what everyone thought. Commander Thrak had called candidates one by one, and with each attempt, I'd watched the same pattern. Check the walls, check the floor, check the ceiling. Use whatever your biology gave you. Pass or fail based on what you were born with. Not one of them questioned the premise. Not one of them looked beyond their own built-in advantages. Because here's what I'd figured out. Sitting in that observation deck, watching aliens literally break themselves to pass this test, Commander Thrak had said the arena provides everything you need. Everything. Not your body provides everything. Not your natural abilities provide everything. The arena. And the last time I checked, we were all holding something when we entered that arena. The test instructions. On paper. Physical, real, tangible paper. When Thrak finally called my name, the observation deck had that pre-failure energy. The kind of quiet where everyone's mentally composing their sympathetic comments for after you wash out. I'd walked into that arena, and I'd looked at the paper in my hand like it was the most interesting thing I'd ever seen. Because in that moment, it absolutely was. The arena door sealed behind me with a pneumatic hiss, and suddenly it was just me, 4 blank walls, and a whole lot of expectations that I was about to fail spectacularly. Through the observation window, I could see faces pressed against the glass. Krill's compound eyes tracking my every movement. Bornu looking concerned, which for a rock creature was impressive. Liss pulsing in what I interpreted as anticipatory schadenfreude. Commander Thrax's voice crackled through the speakers. "Candidate Morrison, you have 10 minutes to improvise a weapon. Your time begins now." I stood there for a moment, just holding the test paper. The instructions were pretty standard. Report to arena, await commands, demonstrate improvised weapon, don't die. The usual military checklist format, printed on what felt like standard weight academy paper stock. Nothing fancy. I started walking the perimeter, paper still in hand, making a show of examining the walls like everyone else had done. I could practically hear the collective thought from the observation deck. He's stalling. He has no idea what to do. They weren't entirely wrong. I did need a minute to commit to what was either going to be a brilliant subversion of expectations or the most embarrassing failure in Academy history, possibly both. I stopped at the center of the arena and looked down at the paper. Really looked at it. Then I started folding. The observation deck's ambient noise changed. I couldn't hear them through the soundproofing, but I could see the confusion spreading like a wave. Aliens nudging each other, gesturing at me. Krill's mandibles working overtime in what I assumed was incredulous clicking. I kept folding. Crisp, precise creases. Lengthwise first, creating a reinforced spine. Then angular folds along the edges, each one strengthening the structure, creating rigidity where there had been flexibility. Is the human performing a cultural ritual? Someone probably asked. Is this how they surrender? Someone else likely wondered. I folded the paper into a flat, elongated shape. Then I worked the edge, creating multiple thin layers compressed together, aligned perfectly. The kind of edge that, with the right angle and sufficient pressure, could do a lot more damage than anyone expected. Commander Thrax's voice came through the speakers again, and for the first time I detected something other than military monotone. "Candidate Morrison, explain your methodology." I held up the folded paper, showing it to the observation window. "You said the arena provides everything we need, Commander." Everyone else was so focused on the arena's structure that they forgot the most obvious object in the room. I paused for effect. The test itself. The observation deck exploded into motion. I couldn't hear it, but I could see it. Aliens gesturing wildly. Instructors leaning forward. Thrax's reptilian face doing something that might have been surprise, though it was hard to tell with his species. I continued, speaking directly to the observation window. Every candidate entered this arena holding a physical object. Paper. We were literally handed the solution and told to improvise. And every single person dropped it because they assumed the weapon had to come from themselves or the arena's infrastructure. I tested the edge against my thumb, carefully. Not enough to cut, just enough to feel the surprising rigidity. Paper, when folded correctly, becomes something else entirely. The individual fibers align, the layers compress, and suddenly you have an edge that's a lot sharper than people give it credit for. "Humans don't have acid spit," I said, working another fold to create a better grip. "We don't have retractable claws or plasma manipulation or telepathic powers. What we have is pattern recognition and a 5,000-year history of turning literally anything we can get our hands on into weapons. Rocks, sticks, bronze, steel, plastic explosives. And yes, paper." I created another fold, forming a handle wrapped in layers for better grip stability. "Do you know what a paper cut is, Commander?" Thrax's voice came back, deadpan. "Enlighten me." "It's what happens when something thin enough and rigid enough hits skin at the right angle. The edge is so fine that it slices between cells rather than crushing them. It's surprisingly destructive for something so mundane. Now imagine that same principle applied with intent and force." I made a few practice motions, testing the weight and balance. The paper weapon felt absurd in my hand. It looked ridiculous. A piece of folded bureaucracy pretending to be dangerous. But that was the point, wasn't it? "You want a demonstration, Commander?" I asked. "That is the requirement, yes." "Then release the dummy." There was a pause. Then the ceiling panel opened, and a test dummy dropped into the arena. Same polymer construction as all the others, same articulated joints, same try-to-destroy-me energy. I approached it slowly, paper weapon held in a standard grip. The observation deck had gone completely silent. 46 apex predators watching a human with a folded piece of paper. I angled the edge, focused on a seam in the dummy's neck joint, and struck. The paper sliced through the polymer gasket with a sound like tearing fabric. Not a clean cut like Liss's plasma whip, but definitely a cut. The dummy's head lolled to one side, the structural integrity compromised. I struck again at the shoulder joint. Another tear. Another failure point. It's not about raw power, I explained, circling the dummy. It's about precision, finding the weak points, applying force where it matters most. That's how humans survived long enough to develop acid-resistant materials and plasma shielding, and all the other technology that lets us compete with species that evolved natural weapons. I demonstrated a thrusting motion at the dummy's chest, and while the paper didn't penetrate deeply, it definitely left a mark. We improvise, I said simply. It's literally our only evolutionary advantage. We take what we have and we make it work, even if what we have is just a piece of paper with test instructions on it. Commander Thrack's voice cut through the arena. Candidate Morrison, your weapon appears functional, if unorthodox. However, I notice you only have one. Paper presumably deteriorates with use. I smiled and reached into my pocket, pulling out 3 more pieces of paper I'd grabbed from the briefing room that morning. Nobody checks if you take extra handouts. Good thing paper is lightweight, portable, and easy to replace, I said, already folding the second one. I can make a new weapon in under 2 minutes. How long does it take to regrow a finger, Bornu? Through the observation window, I saw Bornu's rocky form somehow manage to look offended. Thrack was quiet for a long moment. Then, pass. Creativity score. Exceptional. Lethality. Adequate for purpose. Efficiency. Remarkable. Morrison, you have achieved the second highest score of the day. Second? I asked. Liss's plasma whip was still objectively more lethal. Fair enough. I admitted. But I bet I can make more paper weapons faster than she can maintain that energy form. I walked toward the exit, paper weapons still in hand, and I swear I could feel the weight of every alien eye in that observation deck, reevaluating everything they thought they knew about humans. Turns out we don't need natural weapons. We just need paper and bad ideas. Commander Thrack wasn't done with me yet. Of course he wasn't, because passing was one thing, but making 46 other candidates look like they'd overthought the entire exercise? That required follow-up questions. Candidate Morrison. His voice boomed as I reached the exit. Remain in the arena. I stopped, turned around, and there was something in Thrack's tone that suggested this wasn't going to be a quick congratulations and dismissal. Through the observation window, I could see instructors huddled around him, gesturing at data pads, probably running calculations or questioning their life choices. Maybe both. Commander. Your weapon is unconventional. Demonstrate its full capabilities. We're releasing additional test dummies, progressively more durable materials. Show us the practical applications of weaponized paperwork. I heard Krill's voice faintly through the observation glass. He's going to fail now. Paper can't handle real durability tests. Oh, Krill. Sweet, acidic, overconfident Krill. Happy to, Commander, I said, moving back to the arena center. 3 dummies dropped from the ceiling this time. 1, standard polymer. 1 reinforced composite, and 1 that looked like it was made of actual metal plating. They stood there, lifeless and judgmental, daring me to make office supplies look dangerous. I held up my folded paper weapon, addressing the observation deck like I was teaching a class. Let's talk about physics for a second, specifically pressure distribution. Force applied over a small surface area creates concentrated pressure. That's how needles work, how blades work, how paper cuts work. I approached the standard polymer dummy first. The edge of properly folded paper is approximately 0.1 millimeters thick. For comparison, most combat blades are 0.5 to 1 millimeter. Thinner means more concentrated force. I demonstrated with a swift slash across the dummy's throat area. The paper edge caught the polymer gasket and tore through it. Not a clean slice, but definitely damage. The dummy's head tilted at an anatomically incorrect angle. Now, durability is a concern, I admitted, examining my paper weapon. The edge had bent slightly from the impact. But here's the thing about paper. It's disposable. Replaceable. Abundant. I pulled out another pre-folded paper from my pocket, this one with a slightly different configuration. More layers, tighter compression. Humans figured out a long time ago that if your weapon is cheap and easy to make, you can afford to be wasteful. We built entire military strategies around disposable equipment. I approached the composite dummy. This one was tougher, designed to simulate armored opponents. My first paper weapon wasn't going to cut it, literally. So, I did something that probably looked insane to everyone watching. I took 3 papers from my pocket, overlapped them with staggered folds, and twisted them together into a reinforced spike. The multiple layers created a rigid structure that was significantly more durable than a single sheet. Composite construction, I explained. Testing the spikes. Rigidity. Same principle as laminated armor or composite materials. Layer different elements to create properties that exceed the sum of their parts. I drove the paper spike into the composite dummy's shoulder joint, angling for the seam. It took more force than before, but the spike penetrated, creating a structural failure point. I twisted it, widening the gap, and the dummy's arm fell off. Weak points, I said, holding up the now damaged spike. Every design has them. Joints, seams, connection points. You don't need overwhelming force if you know where to strike. You just need precision and patience. The metal-plated dummy was next, and even I had to admit that was going to be a challenge. Paper versus metal is not a fair fight by any reasonable metric. But humans don't fight fair. That's kind of our whole thing. I walked around the metal dummy, examining it. Solid plating, minimal gaps, designed to be effectively impervious to improvised weapons. Thrak was clearly testing the problems. Limits of my method. Here's where creativity becomes necessary, I said, pulling out my last pieces of paper. Direct assault won't work. The paper can't penetrate metal plating, so we adapt. I folded the papers into thin, rigid strips. Then I approached the dummy and started sliding the paper edges into the microscopic gaps between the metal plates, the seams where panels connected. Paper is flexible before it's weaponized, I explained, working the strips deeper into the gaps. It can fit into spaces that rigid weapons cannot. And once it's inside the armor, I twisted the papers, expanding them within the gaps. It creates internal pressure, compromises structural integrity, makes the armor work against itself. It wasn't fast, it wasn't elegant, but after about 3 minutes of careful manipulation, I'd wedged enough paper into the dummy's joint connections that when I applied pressure to its arm, the entire shoulder assembly collapsed inward. The metal plates, no longer properly supported, shifted out of alignment. Sabotage, I said simply. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the one that destroys the enemy directly. It's the one that makes their own defenses fail. I stepped back from the 3 disabled dummies. One with a torn throat gasket, one missing an arm, one with compromised armor integrity, all defeated by paper. Commander Thrak's voice came through the speakers, and I detected something I'd never heard from him before. Actual interest. Morrison, your species developed this technique? Which technique, Commander? The paper folding, the pressure distribution analysis, or the strategic sabotage? All of it. I shrugged. We developed thousands of techniques, Commander. We had to. We didn't have acid or claws or energy manipulation. We had brains, opposable thumbs, and a really stubborn refusal to accept that we weren't apex predators. So we made tools, improvised weapons, turned everything around us into potential advantages. Paper just happens to be one of about 10,000 materials we've weaponized over our history. I walked to the center of the arena, still holding my damaged paper weapon. You want to know the scariest thing about humans, Commander? It's not our technology. It's not our tactics. It's that we look at literally anything, even a piece of paper with bureaucratic instructions printed on it, and our first thought is, how could I use this to win a fight? Through the observation window, I could see the entire class staring at me, not with mockery anymore, with something that looked uncomfortably like concern. Krill's mandibles had stopped clicking. Bornu had gone very still. Even Liss's glow had dimmed slightly. Pass, Thrak said finally. Revised score. Highest marks of the examination period. Morrison, report to equipment requisition, and leave the paper weapons here. All of them? I asked innocently. All of them. Sure thing, Commander. I walked toward the exit, casually tossing my damaged paper weapons onto the arena floor. What I didn't mention was that I'd already pocketed 4 more folded papers during the demonstration, tucked into my uniform pockets where nobody would think to check. Because the most important lesson humanity ever learned wasn't about fighting. It was about always keeping a backup plan. The equipment requisition office was basically a glorified supply closet staffed by a bored logistics officer named Pennick, who had the kind of face that suggested he'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. He slid a data pad across the counter without looking up. Congratulations on passing, Morrison. Standard issue equipment kit. Sign here. I scrawled my signature on the pad and took the kit. Tactical gear. Communications device. Emergency supplies. The usual survival stuff they gave graduates. Nothing exciting. Oh, and Morrison? Pennick finally looked up, his three eyes blinking in sequence. Commander Thrak left a note in your file. A note? Yeah, says here, and I quote, human candidate demonstrated excessive creativity with administrative materials. Recommend monitoring for potential weaponization of other non-combat items. Also recommend updating test protocols immediately. I tried to look innocent. I just folded some paper, Pennick. Uh-huh. He's also flagged your species designation in the Academy database. There's now a warning that appears whenever a human applicant is admitted. A warning? Pennick turned his monitor around so I could see it. There, in bright red text at the top of the human species profile, was a new notice. Advisory. Human candidates have demonstrated capacity to weaponize standard administrative materials, including but not limited to test documentation, forms, memoranda, and general paperwork. Recommend all examination materials be issued in digital format only or printed on non-rigid, tear-resistant substrates. Exercise caution with any physical objects in human proximity. Species. Shows pattern of improvising weapons from available environment regardless of original object purpose. I couldn't help it. I laughed. They're changing Academy policy because I folded a piece of paper? Not just policy. Thrak's requisitioning soft fiber test materials that can't hold an edge. He's also updating the improvisation trial arena specifications. Future tests will now explicitly note that examination materials are not considered part of the arena environment. Seems like an overreaction. Pennick's eyes blinked again, this time in what I interpreted as weary amusement. Morrison, in the 73 years this academy has operated, you're the first candidate to weaponize the test itself. You turned bureaucracy into a blade. That's not an overreaction. That's Thrak being scared of what humans might do with actual dangerous objects. Fair point. I took my equipment kit and headed back toward the barracks. The corridors were crowded with other candidates who'd finished testing, most of them celebrating or commiserating depending on their results. When I walked past, conversations stopped. Aliens I'd never spoken to stared. Some nodded with what might have been respect. Others just looked confused. Krill intercepted me near the dormitory entrance, his mandibles clicking in a pattern I'd learned meant agitation. Morrison, your technique was unorthodox. Thank you. That was not a compliment. You exploited a loophole. You didn't actually demonstrate combat capability. You demonstrated bureaucratic subversion. I stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Krill, buddy, let me explain something about humans. We've been exploiting loopholes since before we had written language. We built entire civilizations on finding the gaps in natural law and wedging our survival into them. We shouldn't have survived our own planet. We were too slow, too weak, too vulnerable. But we found the loopholes in evolution. We made tools. We made fire. We made weapons. Out of everything we touched. Krill's antennae twitched. That's cheating. That's adapting. And the fact that you think it's cheating is exactly why you almost failed with a melted piece of floor panel while I passed with office supplies. He clicked irritably and scuttled away, probably to complain to someone who'd be more sympathetic. Good luck finding that person in a military academy that literally just gave me the highest test score for creative weapon improvisation. Bornu caught up with me next, his rocky footsteps echoing in the corridor. His regenerated fingers still looked smaller than the others, a permanent reminder of his test strategy. Morrison, he rumbled in that deep geological voice. I wanted to say that your approach was innovative. I did not consider non-biological options. Most people don't, Bornu. That's why it worked. Will you teach others this technique? I thought about that for a moment. The technique? Sure. The mindset? That's harder. Humans spend our entire existence looking at the world and asking, what if? What if we could fly? Build airplanes? What if we could see in the dark? Invent night vision? What if we could turn paper into a weapon? Fold it correctly. It's not about the specific trick. It's about never accepting that something is impossible just because nobody's done it before. Bornu nodded slowly, processing this. Then he lumbered away, probably to reconsider his entire approach to problem solving, or maybe just to medical to check on his finger. Hard to tell with rock people. I made it to my bunk and started organizing my equipment kit. That's when I noticed Liz floating near the ceiling, her energy form pulsing in slow, thoughtful rhythms. You were clever. Human, she said, her voice resonating directly in my head, because energy beings don't need vocal cords. I achieved a higher lethality score, but your efficiency was remarkable. Thanks, Liz. Your plasma whip was genuinely impressive. But it cost me significant energy reserves. I needed 2 hours to recover. You could create another weapon in minutes. That's the trade-off. Raw power versus sustainability. She pulsed brighter. Your species is concerning. How so? Because you look at a piece of paper and see a weapon. You look at empty space and find advantages. You turn limitations into strategies. That's not normal. Most species adapt to their environment. Humans adapt the environment to themselves. It's disturbing. I pulled out one of the paper weapons I'd hidden in my pocket and unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases until it was just a regular piece of paper again. Instructions for the improvisation trial, slightly wrinkled but still readable. You know what this paper really is, Liz? It's a test that asked us to improvise, and then gave us exactly what we needed to succeed. Everyone else brought their evolutionary advantages. I brought the ability to see potential in the mundane. That's not disturbing. That's human. She floated there for a moment, then dimmed slightly and drifted away without another word. I lay back on my bunk, hands behind my head, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in the administrative offices, Commander Thrak was probably filing reports about the human who weaponized bureaucracy. Somewhere in the database, my species had a warning label attached to it. Somewhere in the Academy's future, they were redesigning tests to account for human creativity. And somewhere in my pocket, I still had 4 folded paper weapons that nobody had asked me to surrender. Because here's the thing about humans that I don't think the galaxy really understands yet. We didn't claw our way to the top of Earth's food chain by being the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally armed. We did it by being too stubborn to accept that we weren't apex predators, and too creative to let little things like reality get in the way. Give us nothing, and we'll make something. Give us something, and we'll make it dangerous. Give us a piece of paper with test instructions, and we'll hand it back to you with its edge sharpened. That's not a loophole. That's not cheating. That's not even particularly clever. That's just humanity doing what we do best. Improvising our way to survival, one ridiculous solution at a time. And if that concerns the rest of the galaxy, well, they probably should have thought about that before they invited us to their military academy and asked us to get creative.